Hi BookTube! I'm here with a new series of videos. This week I'm going to be doing what I'm calling Comic Week. So first I want to clarify something. When I use the term comics, I'm using it as kind of a blanket term. I'm using it to refer to what we call graphic novels or manga, single issue comics, collected volumes, e-comics. So that's what I mean when I say comics here, and not just superhero comics either. You can see from my shelf we got like Bone, and we've got some oatmeal stuff, webcomics and manga and graphic memoirs, all sorts of things that we're going to be talking about. So I've been reading comics for a long time now, and in the past 2 years that's really amped up since I discovered e-comics. And actually last year, I think was the first time that my comic readings actually surpassed my more traditional reading, shall we say. So today's video is going to be do comics count as reading?
Comics are for stupid nerds. Literature is for smart people.
It's not in depth as reading an actual book. Comics can't reach the depths that literature can.
You're only looking at pictures, not words. Comics are for kids. Why are you reading comics as an adult?
So what happens when you're reading a comic? There's no denying that the experience of reading a comic is different from reading a written word novel. There's pictures on the page as well as words, and not just added illustrations, but the art is actually part of telling the story. The setting, the characters, the action, everything that would be traditionally described in words in a novel are described using pictures in a comic. Another primary thing that's happening while you're reading comics is that the majority of what you're reading is actually going to be dialogue. I know this isn't always the case. I know that there are some comics that will use descriptions to set up a scene, but most of the time what you're reading on the page is going to be dialogue. Now this is different from a reading experience in a novel because most novels are more than just dialogue on a page. I know there are some novels that are told purely through dialogue, or where it seems like it's purely through dialogue, but in most times there's more than just dialogue on the page. So yeah, there's another difference there. This also means with the use of pictures and with the use of dialogue that the speed at which you read also increases while you're reading comics. You know, talking about my two previous points, there's much less written descriptions. You can get that by just looking at the art. Dialogue also reads much faster than normal text. I also find that because the text is in smaller chunks, it reads faster than if that same amount of text was all compiled onto one page. Now, according to a study done by Dale Jacobs, comic books require readers to create meaning using multiple modalities. Readers of comic books must process all the different components into one solid understanding of the story. So you're using your brain in a different way, and studies show that doing things differently and using your brain differently help to create new neural pathways, which can make you a faster thinker and help stave off neural diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia. Do comics count as reading? I'm going to spoil you and tell you my conclusion before my reasons, and hopefully you are able to extrapolate my conclusion by the fact that I'm even making this video, that yes, comics do count as reading. I get that for some people the idea that something art-based as well as literary-based can be confounding, but it's definitely true. The very basic idea of reading is to share a story. And comics are stories crafted in art. There's form and structures in comics, much as there's form and structure in traditional novels. Comics also carry themes, character development, social commentary. They're doing the same things as solely written novels. They just do it with both words and pictures. Comics are worthy to be treated as reading because they strive for the same goals as other writers and artists, whether you agree with this or not. It's impossible to deny that novels themselves are built on the same principles of creativity and ask the same questions of its readers. Now, I'm going on about how comics can be just as good as the greatest novels, But I know that some comics are brain candy and some are brain kale. Just like how some novels are brain candy and some are brain kale. If you consider the most pulp of middle grade novels, for example, as reading, then you should consider comics as reading. There are even studies that show reading actually improves your brain. Research from the University of Oregon found that comic book readers average 53.5 rare or more complex words per 1,000 words in it. That's more than children's books, which average 30.9, and even adult books, which average 52.7. One study found that graphic texts promote learning and better recall. Another found that students had the best reading comprehension and enjoyed reading the most when they read graphic novels. And they also motivate reluctant readers to pick up a book. You know, recall being in middle school and not wanting to read the assigned texts, but wanting to read comics. You're still reading. So which comics would I consider literary and recommend? Well, the usual go-to recommendations for this are Persepolis and Mouse, which I actually personally didn't like. So let's get those out of the way, and let's get on to my personal recommendations for literary comics. So, The People Inside by Ray Fox. It demonstrates how words aren't really needed to tell a story. There's very sparse text in this comic, but despite this, Fox is able to communicate his story and all the emotions that go with it with just a simple black box sometimes. I'm gonna lock you in the bathroom, yes I am, yes I am. Fables by Bill Willingham and Unwritten by Mike Carey are another go-to recommendation for me. These are both comics which take on traditional literature as background for their stories. So Fables is obviously based on fables, fairy tales, nursery rhymes. They take the characters from these stories and place them in the real modern world. Unwritten is actually about a man who can travel into books, and some volumes actually concentrate on a single novel, such as Moby Dick. Watchmen, Sandman, The Dark Knight Returns by Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, and Frank Miller. These are obviously top recommended graphic novels, and that's for a reason. They are the basis of the canon of literary comics and demonstrate that superheroes can be literary characters. Another one that is one of my all-time favorites is Moonshadow by J.M. DeMatteis. The depth of content, philosophy, and character development in this comic puts it on par with some of the greatest books I've ever read. The last one I'd like to recommend is actually called The Cage by Martin Vaughan James, and this is a fascinating art with words that really messes with your mind and really makes you think, and it's I'd pit it up there with the likes of Ulysses and Infinite Jest and how much it affects the literature of comics and graphic novels and that kind of sense of experimentation. So my question for you is, do you consider comics as reading? Why or why not? Let's talk about it in the comments down below, and thank you for watching.